even for European Council or European Union, who is dealing with that, how much more difficult that is for a country which doesn't have tradition in that, and is very eager to take models from outside. So my question came rather from this perspective: how much of our national identity will still be preserved once we do not know how to strategize for our policies? And another reason was that in times of difficult financial situations, of course, many countries are trying to receive finances from the European Union. And that is even more the question: how do you go with some of the projects that are financed by these outside institutions or foundations or whatever situation Romania could find in order to obtain those finances, and at the same time keep and preserve your identity if those finances were given to specific things. And of course, these institutions always, as you heard in the previous presentation, they try to see what would be a good theme for the whole Europe and how is that dealing with a particular country. So these were my naive objects, and some of them I reached, some I didn't, but I guess research is something for the rest of your life. This is what the professor told me all the time. Okay, so actually the first part, I want to explain a little bit of the theoretical background. I tried to conduct this research because culture is such a buzzword. It can be attacked from different angles, and in order to study it, and in order to study in a program that is limited in time, you have to choose your angles and your areas from which you are studying it. So actually what I did, I chose sociology of culture, cultural anthropology, and cultural studies, and a little bit of public administration, in order to see from this point of view what would be the answer to the questions I just mentioned. And I applied different models that I did not invent, of course, and I tried to see what are the challenges in Central and Eastern Europe, and also how are we in this new European Union identity, because the European Union identity is also challenged and changing according to the countries that join in, of course. So this is a very dynamic process. Okay. And I like very much this quotation that also gives me hope for when I'm down, doesn't. That's dealing with cultural policies is either being very down and overwhelmed, or having the perspective of creating the future. And I really hope, especially for us as Romanians, that we are clinging to the last part of this perspective and engage in this process, though, as I mentioned from the very beginning, it's not easy. So actually I use all these fields, and I try not to give you a lot of data and academic words that don't mean much, but I still want to introduce my research at the intersections of these fields. Okay, so what I try to do, and I give you just a few examples what I mean with these fields. These fields help me from the angles that you can see here in terms of this relationship between universal and particular. The cultural anthropology helped me to have really the fundamentals and the data in order to operate in that field. And also all this debate between local and global, especially now with globalization and all the new technologies and all the trends that are so radically transmitted, I had to appeal to ethnographical studies in order to give me the background and the ground to reach my conclusions. I also also introduce the sociology of culture to see what is the role of the state in all this process. And you can see, as I present to you, that the state really has a role. And my question was how to choose between all these actors that are involved in creating policies. As I already mentioned, the European Union is one, and all these external influences that a country like ours is so eager to embrace. But on the other side, in the process itself, we have different levels. We have the artists, and some of you are here, that are really doing the job, and they have the product at the end in their hands. And then you have the education that really is altering or expanding your knowledge with what culture should be or what art should look like, and that is also very important in molding your mind. And then, of course, you have politics, and you can see, and I also give you an example from Germany this time, because in Romania there are more examples like this. Then the other situation is that when a party comes to lead, they also have a platform, and they also have some ideas regarding culture as well, among other things. But the political parties come and go, and many times when these things change so rapidly with political parties, and you have a cultural platform, and then in 4 years you have a different one, you can also see the difficulties to develop and to go on. And we noticed that in the research with Eastern Germany, but I get to that. And in Romania, of course, it's more obvious. And then you have finances, as I mentioned before, and economical growth, because in the end, culture and art should help us to have sustainability and to grow economically, otherwise it doesn't work. And then you have this very fluid and difficult to explain concept of identity. How is that measurable? Somebody asked before me here, how do we measure some things? Maybe there are things that are very important and very difficult to measure, and there are also many things that are measured, but not necessarily being important. So, and I found that very much with this notion of identity. And then you have globalization and all that pressure on you to raise up to the new situations and new technologies and new programs and what is trendy and what is not. And to have that dimension that overpasses Europe and then it's more international. So how do you network between all this, and how you dialogue between all these actors and all these tendencies and pressures, and also how do you find criteria to define what is important or not when you start to do the process of cultural policy. And I think other countries that are more privileged than we are, and they started this process years ago, I think it's a little bit easier for them also to adapt to the new trends and the new challenges. But for us, who started this process and we are creating our policies at the same time, doing them and everything together, it's a little bit more difficult to also do the reflection and to also detect what are the criteria that we should follow and what are our identity traces that we need to keep and to also see them different from the communism, because most of the cultural traces that we cultivated lately were so much overlapping with the communistic propaganda. So, as you can see, it's not very easy, it's complicated, but I'm trying to be as accurate as I could in my research, and I follow the steps, not to jump immediately to conclusions. I also try to define a little bit the meaning that I'm using some of the words. As I told you before, culture and this area is very difficult to coin and to find the borders around some of these words. So actually I thought it's very important to introduce my limits in terms of culture, globalization, identity, policy, and stuff like that. In this presentation I will not go into all so I will present to you an extended version of my questioning process. But I just wanted you to know that actually I dealt with some of these issues. So actually, the way I refer to culture has to do with all these challenges that are very old in cultural studies regarding is culture and art for all people, or are they only for some elite, and how do we create policies and how we do our how we create our institutions and everything else in order to accomplish that. Also, I'd like to include here the new terminology regarding creative industries that is so much linked to culture nowadays. So you can see that culture is a very big word, but I try to lead you through the way with this aspect of the definition. And I also, when I refer to culture, I refer a lot to the meaning that is given in the European Union and to all the developments that has to do with the opportunities that we find, also in terms of finances, but also in terms of what the agenda of priorities is in the European Union, and also like sociology. And as I told you before, my findings and my belief is now more and more that actually all this focus on culture came in the European Union once people tried to define some policies regarding social practices. It was much easier in the beginning to find a common ground and to do regulations in terms of economics, because things there are a little bit easier to manage in different countries. But then the European Union and the European Committee considered that it's good now to move on to the social directions and policies. And when they arrived there and they tried to struggle with employment, with health systems, they all of a sudden discovered that all these systems are so different depending on the culture. And each culture has different priorities. And in each culture there are some traditions. And all of a sudden, the intelligent people discover that it's not so easy in terms of social ground to find that common ground. So in terms of governance, the European Union went from giving policies and regulations. They went to the open method of coordination, that is more giving people directions or suggestions of how to implement different things that could work or not depending on the country. So I explain this just for you to know that in terms of cultural issues, the European Union is not giving policies. They're only giving us directions, and each country has to deal with those directions and implement or not in their national policy. Okay, so as I told you, most of these questions were triggered by the situation in Romania, and the post-communist countries entered the field of gravity of the European Union, intersecting mainly three dimensions. One was their past, with the long-term trials in the democratization process, also with these mutual influences regarding the enlargement phenomenon and what that entitled in the European system itself. Also this fear of globalization and all these economical and social challenges. So all of a sudden, the European identity, since it's defined by common values, what does it mean when new countries enter that? And what does it mean for the countries to enter? I told you before, that was a huge question for me. But in Romania, the Ministry of Culture was one of the first ministers that were created in 1989, after the revolution. And after my research, I discovered there are different ways of seeing from a chronological point of view this process of creating cultural policies in Romania. And the way I defined it was from 89 to 95, when there was an attempt to create or to work on a strategy of culture. And then from 96 to 2000, and then from 2000 to 2006, that was a period when we tried to enter the European Union. And there was, as you remember, there was a lot of modifications that took place in Romania in order to fit, in a way, to the expectations. And then was the period that followed our entering the European Union. But why I define these periods like this is because immediately after the revolution there was a huge feeling that we should decentralize everything. Since we have this past with the communism, we thought now we have freedom and we have to decentralize everything. But it didn't work because we decentralized what? We gave power to the local people to take decisions, but it didn't really work in terms of money, in terms of strategy, in terms of everything. So that creates a very uncomfortable place, and that is the dynamic. Okay, and as I promised, I would like now to watch a short movie. Because when we talk about cultural identity, we cannot skip cultural differences. And this is a very short movie made by Pixar. It's quite old in terms of Pixar. It was popular in 2010, but they are so fast in moving and developing.